I'm James Murray White. I'm always intrigued when people ask me what I do because I always say I just do the next thing. So at the minute, I've made films for like 20 years, so I guess that luck puts me in the position of being a filmmaker. And at the moment, I'm in the lucky position, very fortunate position of curating a film festival. So yeah, that's me working somehow in the arts and journalism and activism and yeah, exploring life and exploring human culture and the more than human. And I was surprised that it doesn't seem to mean a system or a belief or a structure. It's more about a place. The district, I think, is actually the Greek or the translation of the Greek word. So I have been mulling on this and democracy in terms of the structure and the way that the human society operates in that structure, but it to come back to place and district. I grew up in a village, and I was on the dog walk this morning thinking about that and about that as the model for me in my life of of a place and how a group of humans function together in that place. And it could be very unfunctioning, of course, or it could be high functioning, but it's on the kind of, and I can't think of a better word off the top of my head, but the word rules, how the people in that place decide that they actually want to live together, no matter what you do in your own place or your little family structure, how you might operate as a group and as a community. I'm sure we can go on to talk about how that extrapolates into the bigger picture. Scale village, I think, to try and not necessarily influence, but get us all thinking about how the best ways, and again, best, what does that really mean? But the ways that we all want to kind of function in a society, in our little communities. And is that is that rules? Is that morality? Is that simply through discussion and negotiation? Is that through suggestions, ideas, boundaries, structures? These days, I think it's all up for grabs, and you know, external pressures, and obviously the internal pressures that we as individuals all feel. Um, I just try and engage and keep the ideas flowing and the ideas discussing. In terms of local democracy in the political sense, I've stood uh, stood as a political candidate for a councillor, and I'm quite glad I didn't get it, knowing others who here in Cambridge and in other cities that have very valiantly and nobly done those roles and stay in those roles and also get out of those roles, and trying to shift the political system of democracy with all the issues from on high and from below, and being somewhere in the middle and trying to hold each town or city or ward to whatever kind of standards, plus the politics of individual parties that play into that. But yeah, I'm a keen observer of it, but critical at times. I think if we can all be critical friends of the systems that we live in, we can only have democracy if we actively discuss coming towards our sense of what that best place is, our senses of utopia. Again, that's another one of these words, and I think that's a word that is particularly misquoted and misunderstood. And I'm not saying I understand it either, but our nirvanas. I mean, I think Thomas More, when he wrote Utopia, I think it's a lot deeper and darker than is modern. That word is given these days, but and ultimately we're unpicking a sense of what the system is. I mean, I think there's no doubt about it, and I kind of dwell on this a lot these days, about the system as we perceive it, as we understand it, is breaking down in many ways, or a better phrase I think is composting. And what does that mean? Does it mean the bin men are collecting less, there's less police on the street, or there's less culture, a library may be closing, or, on a bigger scale, international politics are having far too much financial pressure coming through the political system, and I personally think Trump is playing with this at will, but that's the politics of that system, and narcissism and ego has risen to the fore in that. But I don't need to get into an anti-Trump tirade, but in theory, that's democracy for you. And there is a whole load of discussion going on at the moment about that individual in that political system is becoming a dictator, and I think he's actually been caught on camera kind of saying it. He's saying in that context, the way I interpret it is if you want crime stopped, have a dictator, and I can be your dictator. But then again, that's in my opinion, that's a kind of crude misplaying of the democratic system of voting, first past the post. And that's a whole debate whether you have PR or not. Ironically, proportional representation, the only example in in Europe of PR, the PR system is in Israel, but unfortunately, in theory it's fantastic because everyone gets the vote, but it's created all these little parties that have propelled a right-wing extremist into power, and they're all propping that power up, and it's gone to war, and we see the terrible genocide and crimes against humanity that has resulted in. But we could definitely argue that has gone past the point of democracy because there's not enough checks and balances. Coming back to the micro level in terms of democracy, I mean, I'm fascinated in that sense of coming back to the local, what is our local democracy, and the kind of village as well, coming back to that. So we govern, I don't know, how do we would you say you govern yourself? I thought about that in terms of doing meditation, and not that I'm very good at a daily practice, but when you kind of watch the thoughts in our heads. So is that's the micro level of our personal democracy, and that might initially we might just be emptying our heads, or filling our heads with a religious or a spiritual practice, or some kind of mantra, I must do good, or whatever you're all, if you follow something and you feel that you're altruistic in a kind of sense, do you follow that through into a kind of a universal demos, a democratic being in the world? This is something that we need to, and I'm sure you have, and ask our parish councillors here in Fen Ditton, and in the city council, and ward by ward, up to the MP level, and into our hallowed chambers of Parliament and the House of Lords and beyond. I mean, it's interesting here in the UK. Well, I bet we could riff a lot on that. I mean, I've been thinking about landlordism and how that's impacted, and obviously land access and private estates. I was on a amazing place the weekend called the Hardwick Estate in Oxfordshire, and it's the only estate at the moment, private estate, that is going through transference from the owners who've had it, and I say owners, but they've had it, I think 200 years, something like that, and they bought it off a family had it for the previous 400 years, and so it goes back onto the Norman conquests, etc., and the divvying up of the land in the English countryside. Anyway, the current current individuals, the Rose family, are in the process of transferring the whole estate to community ownership and bringing in 100 trustees, most of which live on or around or work on the estate. That is an interesting example of a nascent democracy forming, and there's some amazing people on that estate. Anyway, that's just a little example of interesting democracy in action. Years ago I was a environmental journalist, and I thought that was, that all seemed for me, that going back to that masters in Edinburgh years ago now, it kind of just made me realize that, perhaps the best thing is to be an advocate for land. My tutor at the time had been involved in a very radical campaign on the Isle of Harris about a super quarry that was scheduled to be built, and they did half build it, but Alistair spoke up about that, and that's true democracy. I think when we're an advocate for the other, and the other, us, other people in our village, in our district, in our community, if we truly do that, if we see that, whether they be elders, be they, disabilities, various disabilities known and unseen, etc., or in whatever capacity, but also, standing up for the more than human, the creatures, the tiny, the bugs, and etc. You and I both live with lovely dogs, and Lev, for me, who is asleep behind the chair after his morning walk, he to me is a kind of guide of that, our relationship, and him in the world, and what he needs, and the way he, you know according to him, he operates in the world, and the humans are an add-on. So I don't know. I study him, and I think he studies me with kind of disdain and sometimes adoration. But that's a good way into exploring the more than human. I mean, if we think about rivers, for example, from my looking through my eyes, I see the rivers are in terrible state and polluted, and I don't actually want to be in them. I don't want that physical engagement, which is, I find, desperately sad. So I want to just draw attention to the fact, how have we got to this place, and disrespecting. But it's part of the bigger impact that humans have been having on this round orb that we inhabit. On the way to the Hardwick estate this weekend, we went past a bit of the HS2 construction for that new railway system, and I don't even know what the current state of it is now, as different governments, the Tory government, previous government pushed it through, and then this government seems to be rolling back. But a lot of the physical damage to the earth has been done. So that's an example of a fault line of for trade, for commerce, for economic thinking. I don't think it was ever about employment. Although I remember when I went to some active sites protesting here, I met a lot of Gurkhas, ex-military, the ex-military unit, the Gurkha, who were employed partly as security because of their kind of agility and complete focus. But it was interesting talking to lots of people working for the HS2 project, as opposed to just being there as a protester. I always think you've got to engage. If we set ourselves up with the opposite, it just gets us down into negative spaces, which will end in violence and depression and hatred, won't it? So the fault lines, there's many fault lines, constantly coming up against fault lines, but we've got to keep coming back somehow to the democracy in our own head, in our own system, to unpick that. Otherwise we will live in a world of such black and white polarity that that it's for me that doesn't seem a creative space and an aspirational space to be in, or that I would want others and my community, the community, any human community, to be in and to operate from. My village, whatever that is, the physical village of Girton, whatever that represents to me in my childhood, and the memories of that, and the current day Fendit. Now, I feel I've happily retreated to a village space, a village on the edge, and then there's the city, and then there's the bigger cities, but seeing them as the microcosm. And of course, there's fault lines hidden and known. There might be physical fault lines in the street, I've lived on a fault line in the Middle East where that could kind of explode any time, volcanic energy. So the earth can erupt, the waters can just flow, the waters can fall from above, elements can create, and that also relates in human. I mean, there's a very active human fault line, we know of now, that's been exacerbated, which ultimately is the other. It's the racism endemic in this island that we're seeing kind of projected onto refugees at the moment, and that, by the right wing, and the people are being othered, and it's becoming, that's where I think democracy fails, because it's not encouraging deeper thought and deeper conversation. Yeah, there are many things going on that do that, and transition, and citizens assemblies happening in cities, and being on various themes. I mean, I think that's a really good example of something, of things bubbling up to explore the fault line of this otherings. There's a wonderful book by Starhawk. It's a kind of post, not apocalypse, but something has happened, and it's kind of in a Californian valley, and it's a resilient community has founded or has been there quite a while, and it's them kind of figuring out protecting sources of clean drinking water, and growing healthy, sustainable, good quality food. So yeah, definitely for me is that, but the kind of, on what scale is that sense of democracy? On what scale is that sense of the village life that can sustain that and then connect with other communities? I don't necessarily believe in a utopia, but as we said earlier, I don't know fully what that means, and I think it's, let's not put bells and whistles on something, because it's awareness of the polarities and the fault lines in our human psyche, as well as in the physical landscape, and as in this democratic system of governance that we've built for now. And again, I don't think democracy, I don't think this system, this structure isn't permanent. It's just the now that we're living in. And as I said, I think this system and the capitalist model is composting in various ways, and who knows what will emerge. I mean, just going back to kind of land issues in the UK, I mean, I think we're really struggling as an island nation, as a society, as just one country, with this sense of being ruled, this sense of a royal family. I mean, I don't there's it's soft power, but it's a very strong soft power. And I think we're a long way from a republic, but I think the faster we move towards those discussions about a republic. I used to think that Tony Blair would be a fantastic first Republican leader. But how ridiculous is that? Thinking about that particular individual and the way they've kind of manifested themselves, and is now sitting in Trump's White House discussing real estate deal and on the Gaza Strip. But I think we need to keep having those conversations about what a republic might look like in this country. And there's certain blockages, aren't there, in terms of any system that we inculcate and we agree to or passively agree to, and the kind of idols that we worship blindly or consciously. I think that's for a deeper conversation, and a conversation with people who are deeply steeped in kind of shifting that model. But I think, something I ponder and support in various ways and want us to happen, because these are blockages. These are part of that polarity. When we give power, our own personal power, to a system, how are we doing it consciously, or are we just, oh, another bill has come in, or yes, I've got to vote today and it's going to be the choice of these people, or left, right, or somewhere in the middle, or something. It's giving power to that system, and I think we have to be careful about how we give our power to it. I know lots of people who talk about being out of that system, but I think we have to give it a lot of thought, and it's a lifetime's work to really disengage from those systems and create our own valuable and viable system for living.